What if I told you that a simple argument over breakfast led to an act so final, so irreversible, that it shattered two lives forever? A young couple in the quiet town of LaPlace, Louisiana. The morning sun filters through the windows, the scent of coffee lingers in the air. But beneath this ordinary scene, a storm is brewing, and then, bang! A single gunshot, the kind that doesn't just echo through a home, but through time itself. Tamyrihu Hubbard, 24 years old, a woman who, mere moments ago, was someone's girlfriend. Now she is something else entirely. Joshua Jones, 23 years old, a man who, just this morning, was breathing, laughing, living. Now his body lies motionless on the floor. At 10:36 a.m., a frantic call pierces through the silence, a woman's voice trembling, words barely formed. I shot him. I shot my boyfriend. When deputies arrive, they find Joshua Jones unresponsive, the life drained from his eyes, his body already growing cold. The question is no longer what happened. The question is why, because this was no accident. This was murder. The world moves in patterns. People wake, they eat, they work, they sleep. Lives unfold in routines, in habits formed over years, in the small details that go unnoticed, until they don't. In the quiet town of LaPlace, Louisiana, Joshua Jones and Tamyrihu Hubbard lived one such routine. By all outward appearances, they were like any other young couple, their lives intertwined by love, familiarity, and time. But time has a way of revealing the cracks that no one wants to see. Joshua Jones was 23 years old, a man with his whole life ahead of him. His friends described him as warm, reliable, someone who could make you laugh even on the worst days. He worked hard, lived simply, and surrounded himself with the people who meant the most. He had ambitions, though perhaps they weren't always spoken aloud. A future he saw for himself, one that he was working towards, piece by piece. Tamyrihu Hubbard was 24, strong-willed, determined, outspoken. She was known for her sharp tongue, her quick responses. There was passion in the way she carried herself, passion that, at times, could be mistaken for something else. To the world, she was confident. To those closest to her, she was complicated. Together, they had built a life, shared moments of happiness, the kind that make relationships feel unbreakable. But no relationship is perfect. There were disagreements, words exchanged that couldn't be taken back, arguments that started small, over things that hardly mattered, but grew into something larger. People who knew them said there was tension. It wasn't always visible, it didn't always erupt in public, but it was there, in the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching, in the silences that stretched just a little too long. They had spent years together, and yet, in a matter of seconds, their story would come to an end. Tensions rise, but they do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they gather in small moments, an unspoken resentment, a gesture misinterpreted, a past grievance left unresolved. And then there is a moment, a single moment, when everything changes. Inside the small home on East Lakeview Drive, the air is heavy. The morning light filters through the windows, casting soft shadows on the walls. The remnants of breakfast remain on the counter. Half-eaten food, a pan left on the stove, the signs of an ordinary morning. But something is off. Two voices fill the space, their tones sharp, their words cutting. Why do you always do this? Do what? You're the one making a big deal out of nothing. Nothing? You think this is nothing? Tamyrihu Hubbard's voice is strained, frustration evident. Joshua Jones stands near the table, his back tense, hands at his sides. His movements are restrained, careful. He exhales sharply, as if trying to hold something back. Arguments like this have happened before. The details may be different, but the feeling is the same. A conversation that has nowhere to go, circling back on itself. Joshua turns away, shaking his head. I'm done talking about this. He moves towards the hallway. A small decision, a shift in position, but it is enough. Footsteps, quick, following behind. Don't walk away from me. A chair scrapes against the floor. The tone changes. What was frustration is now something else. Tamyrihu's breathing is uneven. Joshua, standing in the doorway, pauses for a moment before turning back. You always do this, Tamyrihu, every single time. And then a different sound, the distinct metallic click of a drawer, a hesitation. Joshua watches her now, something in his posture shifting. His voice is lower, steady. What are you doing? A drawer, pulled open with force, a hand reaching inside. The cold weight of metal, fingers curling around the grip. A pause. A silence that seems to stretch impossibly long. Put it down. But it is not put down. A breath is taken, a finger moves, and then a gunshot. The sound is not just loud. It is something that cuts through the air, that stops time in its tracks. A sound that does not belong in a space like this. Joshua staggers backward. His body stiffens, reacting to something before the mind fully registers it. His eyes widen, confusion and shock mixing together. He looks down. The bullet has entered his chest. A deep, searing pain spreads through him, radiating outward. His breathing is labored, his body struggling against what is happening. His legs weaken. The room tilts. His back hits the floor with a dull thud. His arms twitch as though reaching for something, stability, reassurance, life. But there is nothing to grasp. Above him, Tamyrihu stands motionless. The gun is still in her hand. The weight of it suddenly unfamiliar, suddenly real. Her breathing is sharp, unsteady. The world around her is unchanged, the same walls, the same furniture. But now there is a body on the floor. And then, nothing. A silence so absolute it almost rings. The only sound left is the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of birds outside. And then a phone is lifted. Fingers press against the screen. A number is dialed. A voice, hers, comes through the speaker, trembling. 911. What is your emergency? I shot him. I shot my boyfriend. The dispatcher's voice remains calm. You shot him? Where is he now? A pause. The sound of breath hitching. He's on the floor. He's not moving. Is he breathing? A hesitation. Too long. I don't think so. There is something in her tone, uncertainty, fear, but also something else. Something not easily defined. Stay on the line. Help is on the way. A shuffling noise. The phone moves, but she does not. Her feet remain planted where they are. The gun is still in her grip, as though her fingers have forgotten how to release it. The seconds stretch. And then sirens. A distant wail at first, barely audible, but growing louder, closer. Red and blue lights flicker through the window. Tamyrihu moves for the first time, stepping backward as the sound of footsteps approaches the door. A knock! Sheriff's office! Open the door. Her hands are trembling now. Slowly, the gun is placed on the floor. The door is opened. Deputies enter, their eyes moving swiftly across the room. The body on the floor. The woman standing nearby. The gun. They do not need to ask what happened. The scene tells its own story. Joshua Jones lies still, his body where it fell. The officers move quickly. One kneels beside him, searching for any sign of life. There is none. The radio crackles. A voice confirms what is already known. Victim is unresponsive, requesting coroner on scene. Another officer approaches Tamyrihu. Her expression is unreadable, her breathing slow. Ma'am, I need you to come with me. She does not resist. Handcuffs click into place. The metal is cold against her wrists. She is led outside, past the flashing lights, past the gathering neighbors watching from a distance. The morning, once ordinary, has now become something else entirely. And in the silence left behind, there is only one question that remains. Why? The first officers arrived within minutes. Their vehicles, marked with the authority of the law, came to a halt outside the small home on East Lakeview Drive. The lights flashed red and blue, reflecting off the quiet suburban houses. The stillness of the street was interrupted by the weight of the moment. A deputy stepped forward, hand on his holster. The front door was ajar, a gap just wide enough to hint at something beyond, a reality far different from the calm exteriors of neighboring homes. Inside, the air was thick, motionless, holding on to the echoes of what had just taken place. The officers crossed the threshold, their boots pressing against the worn wooden floors. And then they saw him. Joshua Jones lay on his back. His body had gone still, the blood from the wounds seeping into the fibers of the carpet. His eyes, which had once reflected the light of life, were now open, unblinking. The silence in the room was absolute. One officer moved quickly, kneeling beside him. 2 fingers pressed against the side of Joshua's neck. There was no pulse. The touch of life had already left him. The radio crackled to life. Male victim, unresponsive, requesting medical on scene, possible homicide. The officers scanned the room, their training sharpening their focus. The kitchen table, the half-eaten food, the remnants of an argument left scattered in objects now abandoned. And then there she was. Tamyrihu Hubbard stood just feet away. Her expression was unreadable. Not shock, not sadness, not anger. Her breathing was measured, controlled. Her hands, now empty, had only minutes ago held the weapon that had taken a life. "Ma'am, step forward," an officer instructed, his voice firm but even. She did. Her hands were placed behind her back, the cold bite of metal wrapped around her wrists. The cuffs clicked into place. "You have the right to remain silent." The words continued, but the weight of them was already known. Outside, the murmurs of neighbors had begun to spread. Faces peered from windows, from behind doors left slightly ajar. An ordinary morning had become something unrecognizable. The crime scene unit arrived soon after. Photographs were taken, every detail captured. The position of the body, the blood pattern, the gun on the floor where it had been set down. Each piece a part of a larger puzzle. Forensic specialists moved with precision. A technician swabbed Tamyrihu's hands. The chemical test would reveal what they already suspected. The gunpowder residue was there, the microscopic particles clinging to her skin, undeniable. The shot had been fired at close range. The evidence told a story, even if she would not. She was placed in the back of the patrol car. The door shut with finality. And as she was driven away, Joshua remained behind, his story now left for investigators to piece together. The interrogation at the St. John Parish Sheriff's Office, the room was small, deliberate in its simplicity. A table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner recording everything. Tamyrihu sat on one side. A detective entered, setting a file down in front of him. He studied her, the way she sat, the way her fingers rested on the edge of the table. Body language told a story long before words did. She did not fidget. She did not cry. She did not ask for Joshua. The detective leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." Her voice, when she spoke, was measured. "We argued." A pause. "He made me mad." Another pause. "I don't know what happened after that." But she did know. The detective nodded, glancing at the file before him. A deliberate pause. "We've already tested your hands. The gunpowder residue is there. The shot came from close range." She did not react. The silence stretched between them. The detective pressed on. "Was it an accident?" A question designed to invite explanation, to elicit a response that could shape the course of what followed. Tamyrihu's gaze shifted slightly. The first sign of movement in minutes. "I didn't mean to. Not I didn't do it. Not it wasn't me. Just I didn't mean to." The detective nodded again, as if considering this. "Were you afraid of him?" A different angle, a different path to the truth. "No." No hesitation. The detective leaned back. "Then why did you have the gun?" A pause. A hesitation, brief but present. "He made me mad," she repeated. The words the same as before. And with them, an understanding settled in the room. There was no claim of self-defense, no justification of fear, only anger, a momentary impulse that had ended a life. The detective closed the file in front of him. That was all he needed. The charges. Tamyrihu Hubbard was formally charged with second-degree murder. The law did not see this as an accident, nor as an act of self-preservation. It was a choice, made in a fraction of a second, but a choice nonetheless. She had fired the weapon. She had pulled the trigger. She had watched Joshua fall. And now the consequences had arrived. Would she express remorse? Would she break beneath the weight of what she had done? As she sat in the interrogation room, her expression unchanged, her body still, one thing was clear. Some answers would never come. Every crime has a story, but stories are rarely simple. A single act of violence is often the result of something much larger, something that began long before the final moment. The events of that morning are known. The evidence is clear. But the question remains, why? To understand what truly happened inside the small home on East Lakeview Drive, we must consider the possibilities. Was this a crime of passion, an unplanned explosion of anger, or was there intent, something decided long before the trigger was pulled? And if neither, was it something else entirely, an act of survival, a desperate reaction to a threat that has not yet been revealed? There are 3 possibilities. Each one carries weight. Each one leads to a different truth. Theory 1, a crime of passion. Some say the argument that morning began over breakfast, that it was something trivial, something inconsequential. But in cases like these, the final argument is rarely about what it seems. Joshua and Tamyrihu had been together for years. Relationships are built on patterns, habits formed over time. There were moments of love, of happiness, but there were also moments of conflict, moments when voices were raised, when frustrations surfaced. Had there been arguments before? The answer is yes. Friends recalled tension between them. At times, the energy between the two could shift abruptly, laughter giving way to silence, light-hearted conversation turning to something else. Those close to them say their disagreements were frequent but private. Rarely did they spill beyond the walls of their home. But what was different about this argument? What transformed an ordinary dispute into something lethal? There is no evidence of premeditation, no sign that Tamyrihu had planned for this. No messages, no recorded threats, no purchases made in advance. The gun was already in the house. It had been there before that morning. It was not brought into the argument. It was introduced in the heat of the moment. In that second, a decision was made. Was it conscious or was it impulse? Crime scene experts noted the close range at which the shot was fired. There was no hesitation, no struggle over the weapon, no sign that Joshua had tried to defend himself. The shot was immediate, straight to the chest. Not a warning shot, not a miss, not a hesitation of any kind. In cases of passion-driven violence, emotion takes control. Rational thought disappears. Actions unfold before the mind has time to comprehend them. If this was a crime of passion, then the key question is this: did she regret it the moment it happened? Her actions afterward suggest otherwise. She did not attempt CPR. She did not plead for Joshua to hold on. She made the call, but the words she spoke were measured. I shot him. Not I didn't mean to. Not it was an accident, just a fact. A statement of what had already been done. This was a crime committed in the moment. But a crime of passion does not explain everything. There is another possibility. Theory 2, planned murder. To plan a murder is to accept its consequences long before it happens, to decide in a moment of clarity that an act of violence will take place. Did Tamyrihu intend to kill Joshua? If she did, there would be signs. There would be a history, text messages, threats, warnings from friends, but there are none. No reports of previous violence, no claims of fear, no history of escalating threats. But what about the days leading up to the shooting? Had something changed? Had an argument taken place before that morning? Had she made up her mind before the sun rose that day? For investigators, the evidence did not support premeditation. The gun was not hidden, not concealed until the moment she needed it. It was retrieved in the heat of the moment. If she had planned to kill him, she would have had the weapon ready. But what if the plan was not to kill, but to threaten, to make a statement, to gain control in an argument that was slipping away? In past cases, individuals who committed impulsive homicides often claimed they only meant to scare the victim, that they had no real intention of pulling the trigger, that they expected the mere sight of the weapon to end the argument. But Tamyrihu did not wave the gun. She did not use it as leverage. She fired. Immediately. If there was a plan, it did not last longer than a second. And for that reason, investigators ruled out premeditation. But if she did not plan it, was there another reason? Was this not an attack at all, but an act of defense? Theory 3, self-defense. Self-defense requires one thing above all else: imminent danger, a threat, a fear for one's life so overwhelming that action becomes necessary. Was Tamyrihu afraid? Her words in the interrogation room suggest otherwise. She never claimed fear. She never said Joshua attacked her. She never said he threatened her life. And Joshua's body told its own story. There were no defensive wounds on him, no signs of a struggle, no marks on his hands or arms that suggested he had tried to harm her before the shot was fired. The angle of the bullet confirmed it. Joshua had been standing, facing her. If he had been moving toward her, if there had been a fight, the angle would have been different. There were no signs of a scuffle in the room. No objects knocked over, no scratches, no bruises. Nothing suggested that she had been cornered. The law defines self-defense by one standard: whether the person believed they were in imminent danger. And yet, Tamyrihu herself never made that claim. She did not say she had no choice. She did not say she had to pull the trigger. She only said, "He made me mad." Those words were simple, but they carried weight. Not "he scared me," not "I thought he was going to hurt me," just anger. A flash of emotion so strong that it overtook everything else. And so, the theory of self-defense does not hold, because to defend oneself is to fight for survival. But Joshua Jones never had the chance to fight. What really happened? Three theories: a crime of passion, a planned murder, self-defense. And yet the truth does not lie fully within any of them. The reality is something else, something faster, something that existed in the space of a second, a moment of emotion, a choice, and a life that ended because of it. A single gunshot, a single moment, and now the consequences unfold. Tamyrihu Hubbard was taken from her home in handcuffs, placed in the back of a patrol car, and driven away. The walls that once surrounded her in daily life were now replaced by those of a jail cell. Her world had changed in an instant, and with it, the future she once imagined for herself had disappeared. But what happens now? Where is she now? Tamyrihu Hubbard was booked into the St. John the Baptist Parish Jail, charged with second-degree murder. In Louisiana, second-degree murder is a charge that carries one of the most severe sentences in the state. If convicted, the law is clear: life in prison without the possibility of parole, no reduced sentence, no early release, only time. She awaits her trial behind bars as the legal system moves forward. The prosecution builds its case. The defense prepares its argument. The court will hear both sides. But what will the verdict be? Could she argue self-defense? For Tamyrihu, there are few defenses available. Self-defense requires evidence of imminent danger, a life-or-death situation that leaves no other option but to act. But what is missing here? There is no history of abuse, no record of prior violence, no evidence that Joshua had posed a physical threat. His body showed no signs of struggle, no bruises, no scratches, no defensive wounds. If there had been a fight, there would be evidence of it: overturned furniture, marks on her arms, signs of an altercation. But there was none. And then there are her own words. He made me mad. Not he scared me. Not I thought he was going to kill me. Simply anger. If she had acted in self-defense, she would have said so immediately, the moment the police arrived, the moment she made the 911 call. But she did not. The law demands proof of self-defense, and in this case, there is none. What sentence could she face? In Louisiana, second-degree murder is absolute. If found guilty, she will spend the rest of her life in prison. There is no discretion in sentencing. The judge has no choice. The law does not allow for reduced time, no matter the circumstances, unless the charge is reduced. If her legal team argues that this was a crime of passion, the charge could be lowered to manslaughter. Manslaughter carries a very different sentence. Instead of life in prison, the penalty is up to 40 years. With good behavior, parole is possible. A future outside of prison is still within reach. The question is, will the jury believe her? Did she act in a blind rage, unaware of what she was doing, or did she make a choice? What do you think? Now we turn the question to you. Was this a crime of passion, a moment of uncontrollable emotion, or was it something else? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts, your perspectives. Do you believe this was second-degree murder, or should the charge be reduced to manslaughter? Vote in the comments. Second-degree murder, life in prison, no parole. Manslaughter, a maximum of 40 years with a chance of release. The law has its own way of deciding. But in the court of public opinion, where do you stand? Drop your thoughts below. And if you found this case compelling, if you want to see more stories that explore the truth behind the crime, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because every case tells a story, and every story deserves to be told.